Hey everybody, welcome back to another Q&A. It is February 26th, 2024. We have some questions ready to go, so we're going to jump right in and start covering those. First question, how are some meals looking like for you right now? So they're asking about some meals in my diet currently. What are those looking like? My personal nutrition does vary quite a bit. Of course, I have nutritional goals in terms of my needs, but my actual food selection does vary quite a bit. It's going to be difficult for me to say, like, here's a specific meal that I'm eating, but I can give you guys some ideas of like the different foods that I eat, and maybe that'll be helpful currently. So I probably rotate through about 5 to 6 different protein sources. Usually some ground turkey. I'll use some different organ meats potentially. Sometimes I'll throw in some exotic meats when I get them. Last week I did some kangaroo. This week I am actually going to do some ground camel that I bought at Jungle Gyms. And beef, of course. Eggs, egg whites, whey isolate. Those are staples. I'll do chicken once in a while. I just really haven't been on much of a chicken kick lately, so I haven't done much. I've been doing more turkey. But I will rotate chicken in here and there, and sometimes some lean pork once in a while. Starches or carbohydrates are a little less varied, just because there's only so many things that you're gonna do there. Definitely rice, different varieties, jasmine, basmati, white, whatever. Any of those are fine. Rice cakes, any other like rice-based carb is pretty typical. Also, I have potatoes, so I'll do red, white, yams, sweet potatoes, you name it. Pretty much any of those are fair game. Oats, I do utilize some oats. I do utilize some cream of rice, which I guess is a rice source. I do utilize some gluten-free pastas and breads once in a while. And carbohydrate powder, intra-workout primarily. Honey, I'll use honey and some different things like that for sweetening and for carbohydrate. Fruits, not a huge fruit eater, but I do try to get fruits into the diet. I wish I liked more fruits, but it's not really in my palate, unfortunately. But I do some smoothies, which does help, so I can blend up things like strawberries and some of the other fruits that I don't like as much. I can do strawberries a little bit, but I prefer to blend them. I do like berries, blueberries, raspberries, things like that, so I'll have those as well. I do some of the organic fruit squeeze packets a lot, which have some blends in them. I just try to stick to stuff that doesn't have anything else added. It's literally just fruit puree. So I'll get things like peaches and pears and bananas and apples and blueberries and raspberries, and they'll have like some vegetables in them too, like carrots, spinach, kale, stuff like that. So I'll do a variety of those. I probably do about 3 packets of those a day, honestly. So I leverage those pretty heavily since they're just essentially fruit puree. They retain maybe not all, but most of the nutrition. Fat sources, I will vary as well. So, variety of oils, avocado oil, coconut oil, grass-fed butter, macadamia oil sometimes, red palm oil. I like that for the vitamin A, the vitamin E, some nutrients in there that are pretty unique. So I do like to use that. Whole eggs, grass-fed beef, things like that. So I get quite a bit of variety there. I'm sure I'm missing a lot of stuff. I throw in all kinds of random stuff in there as well, vegetables as well. But those are some of the foods that I eat on a regular basis. Are there any machines you have an eye on for the new barn gym? So I don't have anything super specific right now. I have dabbled around with the idea of getting like some kind of converging chest press. But then I've also considered getting something that has a Smith machine in it, because there's a lot of versatility there. And even doing some of the higher end functional trainer type of machines. There's some really nice, like, semi-commercial grade ones now that have the Smith machine, have the lat pull downs, like have all that other stuff in there. I already have a double cable stack that's just like a straight across cable stack with stacks on each end, so I can do a lot with that. I wouldn't mind having one that's a little more adjustable, and I had those other functionalities with it, so that's a consideration if I want to get like several things kind of in one piece. Those are the things I'm primarily looking at right now if I were to add anything. How would you structure the big three in a push-pull legs rotation? So I'm assuming they mean like a squat, bench, deadlift. So if you really want to use those movements, I mean, the first things you want to ask is, what are you trying to achieve with those movements, and what kind of weaknesses do you have? Are you just a novice that's just trying to look for like overall muscle growth? Do you have really specific areas that need to be brought up more so than others from a physique standpoint? Are you a competitor? What are you trying to achieve? Is it strength purely? Because those movements are going to involve several areas of musculature. Now, bench press is a little bit more limited because, of course, you're getting pec, you're getting anterior delt, you're getting tricep in there as well. But it's not going to be quite as complex as something like a deadlift, which has a ton of different recruitment going on. Depending on your mechanics, you can really bias glutes, hamstrings in a deadlift. You can really even if you're bending your legs, you can really bias erectors. You can have a lot of isometric tension in like the upper back, traps, places like that. Lats a little bit, but really depends on how you set it up and what your needs are. I would consider what areas you're really trying to bring up in your physique, and that would determine how you would set those up. Next thing, of course, is they're going to be pretty nervous system intensive. Like they're going to be high fatigue movements, right? Compared to something that's more braced and requires less stabilization. You really want to consider that too when you're figuring out how much of those things you want to do and how often you want to do them. So it's difficult to say exactly how you would structure that in a program per se, because I don't really know the goal of the program, but you can at least take those things and take those considerations and figure out how you might insert them in your own program. Question: are there types of inquiries that you can cover typically through a consult call versus signing up full-time? Or maybe what are the differences between those? So I do a lot of consultation calls, which I call a one-off consultation. They're not necessarily a one-off per se, because a lot of people do include follow-up depending on the case. There are a couple main things to consider when you're inquiring about that type of service. So a one-off consultation or a consultation, I guess, if you will, if you're not inquiring about full-on, continued guidance. It is one time. So it could include some continued support if you're including some follow-ups in there, for sure. And I do encourage that depending on the case. But main things you want to consider are, how well can you execute stuff on your own? I mean, that's a huge factor. Of course, if you're given something, granted, I'm giving instructions on execution and trying to consider things the best I can, but I don't really have the type of control that I would normally have. So how well can you do these things on your own? Do you need accountability? Like what does that look like? Complexity of the case does matter. Now, I don't think that, or at least in my experience in a lot of the consultations that I do, I'm not purely determining which service is best based on complexity. That is a consideration because, of course, some cases take a lot more ongoing assistance, but I've definitely had more complex situations that have been very successful through consultations, and other lesser complex situations, at least on paper, that needed ongoing assistance because of those other variables. You really have to take those two things and really kind of consider both of them in totality, and that determines which of those services is going to be best. Because I've definitely had cases that have had lots of attempts, they've had other coaches, they've tried stuff on their own, and we have been super successful just doing a consultation with a plan of correction and me reviewing information and doing all that stuff. Very successful. But that's not to say that I'm encouraging that. When I intake people, I'm always going to give my opinion on that up front, realistic expectations, whether or not I encourage follow-up, and so on and so forth. And then we can kind of decide from there. Top 5 vegetables you would like to see as daily staples in someone's diet. Palatability is still a consideration. Like, I just genuinely don't want people to have to eat a bunch of stuff that they hate on a regular basis. That creates a stress response, an emotional response, and kind of disdain for the diet. Trust me, things don't work better when you hate them. They just don't. Try not to do tons of things that you dislike. Now, you have to make some compromise, of course, and your palate can refine, and you can start to like other things over time as you do them, but we may not want to come right out of the gate with that. So that's a huge factor. I would say this, without giving you the exact vegetable necessarily. Things you would want to look at. One is, if you can tolerate cruciferous veggies, there are benefits. Things like broccoli, a lot of sulforaphane in there, they're beneficial, okay? So having that in the diet would potentially be helpful if it doesn't cause any digestive distress, depending on what your goals are, depending on if you're currently dealing with any digestive issues. 2, colors, right? So things that'll provide like beta carotene, provide some polyphenols and some different antioxidants that might not be contained in those other vegetables. So like carrots, for example, I mean, they kind of seems unconventional, but they are pretty nutrient dense for certain things, right? As are like bell peppers, okay? So having colors in there is also super helpful. Also looking at, of course, like fiber content. Not all vegetables are the same from a fiber perspective. Some are much higher, some are much lower, by volume, right? Or by like calories, percentage of fiber based on like how many carbohydrates are in it or whatever. So having lots of fiber in there is helpful if that's a way that you are getting your daily fiber intake in. Other things would be like, are you trying to obtain some dietary iron from these? Are you trying to, gain more antioxidant capacity from these? So using something, vegetables that are like higher in vitamin C, like all those things are considerations. I think that the main takeaway there is going to be probably getting in 5 different vegetables and potentially rotating them. Okay. So I will name some that I use in diets regularly because they're well tolerated by most people. So if we can get in some cruciferous veggies, that's great. So like broccoli, it's good. Cook it, but not everyone can handle it. 2, I like to use some more like lower flavor, I call them like less robust veggies too, because people can flavor them differently and they're easier to eat in higher volumes. So things like zucchini, things like squash, things like cucumbers. I will also potentially rotate in varieties of like bell peppers, green beans. People like that stuff. It's easy. Mushrooms, interestingly enough, you get some selenium. There's some different nutrients in there that are a little bit unique because it's really a fungus, I guess. Leafy greens. Okay, leafy greens, not everyone likes leafy greens, but if you can get them in there, great. I do use like smoothies with people sometimes, so we'll try to get them in that way. Kale's gross. I don't even know any. If you like kale by itself, then more power to you, but it's nasty. But you can definitely put a little bit of kale or even spinach in a smoothie, and it's not going to disrupt the flavor too much unless you're like, piling, a pound of it in there. So you can do that pretty easily. Other things, maybe untraditional ones, I may even use things like I said, like carrots, even peas in the diet, which might be a little bit unconventional. I mean, shoot, I think the thing to keep in mind is like, really, they're all good. Really, all of them can be beneficial, and that you should vary them. I really try to get probably anywhere from minimum 4, but I would really like more like 6 or 6 at least in a diet in terms of variety. And most of the meals that I build out that have vegetables in them will have normally 2 to 3 options that are similar that we can match up macronutrient wise, and we just spread that out throughout the diet, and they're going to have veggies multiple times per day, if not almost every meal. There's no reason that you can't get in a minimum of 4 different types, if not more than that, in the diet relatively easily. Hope that's helpful without actually naming 5 specific ones. So that is all for today, guys. I really appreciate everyone tuning in as always, and I will talk to you next time.